Hello everyone, it's John, and I thought that I would share with you what the setup and what my early days of role playing would have looked like from my perspective as the dungeon master, as we were called in those days. So, for a setup which would have been fairly typical at my place, would have looked like what you see here before you. We would have had a communal set of dice for the players. There would have been character sheets, which I would have photocopied and had plenty of blanks on hand, and the table would have been set up accordingly. You'll notice that there is one chair that seems to be set rather conveniently close to the Game Master's screen, because generally you will find that there's always one person in the group who is always very curious about what happens over the other side of the Game Master's screen. Isn't there? If it's just what it is that they're rolling, they just want to make sure that you're not cheating on your dice rolls. Yes, they're very, very concerned about, well, you're not cheating, are you? Even if that cheating is ensuring that they don't drop dead from being, killed by a lowly kobold or something like that. Or, being able to see what the map is that they're just about to walk into, or perhaps see what monsters that I've got the monster manual open up on. But yeah, they're the sort of individuals. But the other thing that you will notice that's missing from this table is that there is no hex grid or a grid system on the table, and no miniatures. We didn't use them in those days. It was all theatre of the mind, and while we would have one of the players would map the adventure and would record where they were going and their progress through wilderness or through a town or through a dungeon or whatever, how encounters would play out was all done through mental imagery, and people would be able to go, well, I'll move here, I'll set myself up in a position to be able to attack this particular thing, and we would work it out accordingly. There was no problems with being able to do this. We were all fairly mature, even if we were, I suppose, immature adults in many other regards. But look, it was the fun days and early days of role play, and it was nice actually to be part of that. And the system met the needs for what it was in the day, and everybody enjoyed themselves. Of course, everybody tinkered, and which was just human nature. And of course, in the end, that led to other role-playing games being developed in due course, and there were a plethora of them during the 70s and the 80s. But that was what was there, and of course the players, of course it was, let's just say that we would probably have dropped dead from obesity and diabetes and extremely poor health due to the fact that we would consume so much junk food. Although before I got married, I think we spent most of my time at my mother's or my parents' place, and she fed us, so at least we got some dietary food, so that was at least not too bad. But we still consumed far too much soft drink and potato chips and all sorts of things like that. So, but they, I guess, were obligatory comfort food to go with a comfort game, which was part of growing up with role-playing games in those days. So and of course the banter and the camaraderie and that is part of role-playing back then is still very much alive and well today. So I should say, was on this side of the screen. And for me, it was AD&D. I could have gone for Dungeons and Dragons, but AD&D, I guess, was the primary one that took up the chunk of my time. And for me, behind my screen would have been the DM's guide, would have been the player's handbook, because I needed it, because the spells and everything that the players used, and of course would have been initially the monster manual. So there was also the Dragon magazine and the White Dwarf at the time produced a lot of additional monsters, traps, spells and things like that. So there was a lot of additional material that we had photocopies for, or we had, like I've got down there Dragon magazines, I've got White Dwarfs, I think, scattered over in the other bookcases. So, there was a plethora of additional material that we could have had in there. And of course behind me, pardon me, I've got all the other AD&D stuff up until we went to second ed, which it was okay, but it was but yeah, so all that other material was available for me if I needed. But for me, keeping it as minimal as possible was how I enjoyed playing most of my role-playing games, because once you start to expand too much, too many things become too many variables, and the game really starts to spin out of control. So we would have, okay, so besides those books, I would have, for instance, in those days, we'd have had adventures. Yes, these delightful, rather antique looking ones, aren't they? And I must admit they're in really good nick. And of course they were done on this style, the map on the inside. Who can remember those? And then all we had is in this case here, it's how many? A 12, well, less than a 12 page module, considering most of it's, and all it really does is just give you a very, very not mandatory, very minimal information as to what's in the location, what monsters are in there, and you're left to your imagination to fill everything else in. And of course, today people don't like not being told what they can't find in things. They need to be told everything. Please tell me what I should put in here. Explain. We've got a politician here in Australia who always has a catch cry going, please explain. It's sad. People need to realise that you don't need to be told what to be able to do with your, with a role-playing adventure. It's there for you to be able to flesh out yourself. If you just have a thing saying, here's what's, roughly in the room, fill out the rest of the details yourself. But people just don't seem to have imagination. Don't ask me why, but yeah. Anyway, I could probably drone on forever about that, but that's, I guess, my opinion. I could very well be wrong, but and of course, some of the other things that they produced for the time were they had non-player character record sheets. Never used it. Got it, never used it. This one, though, I have used, and that's the Rogues Gallery, which is an exceptionally good little book for the time, which just gave you all the stats and that for I guess, encounters. So you had clerics and you had liches, you had parties that could be found. I think Digby. Do I see Digby in there? Rigby, yeah. So you had the people from the Greyhawk So that was, it's personalities. There you go, personalities. Yeah, so that was actually quite a good book in my opinion. So that will always remain there. Another one that I found absolutely no use for was the Dungeon Master's Adventure log. It only had a little bit of information. I'd say probably about 6, maybe less pages that had some information. Actually, not even that. I think of some combat modifiers and stuff, and the rest was just blank records that, quite frankly, I could keep all the information in a standard book. But for the time I bought it thinking, oh yes, it's going to have wonderful stuff, and because I think it was sealed when it came, so you couldn't see what was really inside, hoping that it was something wonderful. So yeah, it was for me. They were fun times, the early days of role playing, and because there was no internet, the places to meet to play were the universities, the clubs. See, clubs in those days were really the linchpin for social life for a lot of the, I guess, the communities. There were, I guess, there was still a lot of people who were playing individually amongst families or friends, but clubs really were the only way that you could reach out and greet people. And certainly in the early days, Queensland role players certainly played a significant part in getting out there and advertising, certainly in Queensland, certainly southeast Queensland, about role playing. Yeah. So I was quite pleased to be associated with them in those days. But yeah. All right. Well, look, that's what role playing was for me in those days. So look, thank you very much for taking the time to watch my little bit of waffle. And till next time, signing off, the Honourable John.